When Hidden Summoners released in 2018, it was really easy to write Mayakashis off as a disappointment. Even I really only looked into them as a joke because I liked to know what all zombie decks could do. But over the years, the Mayakashis, even without having gotten a lot of direct support, have slowly developed themselves into one of the best zombie decks out there. This is the culmination of 7 years of working at it. Going from thinking that Heijin was the only option as a normal summon because obviously it's your one card starter, to realizing that Daki is in fact the best normal summon in the deck and everything else is secondary. Going from thinking that this deck is incredibly xenophobic to realizing that just about anything in the main deck that doesn't really require a lot of extra deck work is perfectly in line to position with the Mayakashis. Going from thinking that this deck was dead to every hand traps to realizing that with the current state of the meta, no one actually plays hand traps that can destroy this deck's combo line. This deck has seen a lot of hybrid experimentation, from Zombie World to the better Eldritch to Dogmatica to even like a full-throated Kaiju engine. But in 2023, there was a video posted by Bluemoy that the Brave Mayakashi version was the version that he thought would be the most successful. Using Daki, not Heijin, as your primary summon, you simply combine Daki with any odd level monster you could put onto the field and got into the synchro line that way. We have now followed that line of thought to this current iteration of the build. With all the great cards that 2024 has provided zombies, we are able to renovate that strategy without even having to use the Brave engine, which was choking out a lot of space for non-engine. In this deck, you will see that the Delta of Invitation takes over almost all the space that was required for the Brave engine beforehand. Delta of Invitation is a wonderful card that when there is a zombie monster on the field, you simply get an odd level token. The level 5 plus the level 2 gets us into our 7, which is the best Mayakashi starting point for their synchro chain. The 7 having spell trap destruction, the 9 having monster destruction, the 11 being big and immune. We didn't really need to go through the 3 and 5 all the time, they were always a little bit excessive. So keeping a healthy amount of Kashtiras, having Delta of Invitation, and running the Mayakashi Daki plus the 3 return, we got to a point where we had about a 42% chance to open the 2-card combo without any issues. We still wanted to open a little bit more, and that's where you keep Heijin around. 1-for-1 Heijin and the Mayakashi return, if you don't see any of the other pieces, is about a 57% chance to see. That's enough for this deck to largely have a play if it wants to do something on 6 cards worth of interaction. So, with that, we needed to find the best ways to fill out what was essentially 30 other cards with interaction to trade with whatever our opponent was doing. The Kashtiras are the best point of this, being level 7s to continue the chain, but also having interrupts naturally built into them that once they hit the field, they can start trading with opponents' resources, gave us a lot of options to play this deck in a very easy to understand position. You use all of your non-engine to try to establish a little bit of a break into the field and get Daki down once everything has disappeared enough that Daki can simply set up your OTK and leave you with enough interactions that if you do not OTK, you have your interrupts from your spell trap destruction, your monster destruction, and your big immune monsters to make it through to the next turn and finish what you started. Delta of Invitation contributes to this by having Tartarus as a possible send, being something that will trade out whatever you're able to set onto the field and the Delta field spell to destroy that many monsters on your opponent's side of the field, spells and traps included, and it's a send to grave. This meant that every single one of the odd level monsters Daki paired with were both engine for us and board breakers. Well, we could add into that more by having Imperm and Ultimate Slayer help increase the chances that we were able to get through our opponent's field. Having 16 cards that are almost explicitly towards interrupting your opponent in a casual deck is basically unheard of, especially one that has as much OTK potential as Mayakashis. Sure, you could find meta decks that are able to do this, but finding a deck like Mayakashi able to fit that much non-engine in and still power through for an OTK, that's what ends up making it one of the best zombie decks in today. And because Daki cannot be impermed, Ash Blossom, Mournered, or Veilered, and Bestials have forced out DD Crow, Skullmeister, and Ghost Spell, there's very few hand traps that are actually capable of interrupting your combo lines on the regular. That would essentially be Nibiru, which is why we have Mad Mauler in the main deck. If you're able to find your setup with Daki, getting to Yuki Musume and sending Mad Mauler to the graveyard guaranteed that you would at least be able to set up a board after Nibiru. When Nibiru gives you a level 11 token, Mad Mauler can come out of the graveyard, reduce it to 9, and you can go into your Gastra Decoro. This allows Daki to resummon again, getting into your Link plays guaranteed, and at least having the revive plus the Yuki level 4 on field. Being that this deck is now so good against negates, you generally find the only real interaction that screws up your combo lines being destructions and banishes. That is why sometimes you'll see Delta of Invitation not sending the Eldritch like I do for extension, but sending Al Ghul Mazira. I don't normally choose to have Al Ghul in this deck simply because Mayakashis like to be destroyed, so long term I would prefer to allow the destruction to come through, but it can insulate your combos occasionally from 1 or 2 cards like Ghost Ogre, that is able to take out your links when they activate their effects on the field, or the Flying Mary. Other than that, you will probably lose to SP either way. That's just the reality of a casual deck. With Yuki Musume sending Mad Mauler almost every time when you go on to your first turn, you don't run 2 Mizukis anymore. Instead, getting the second Mizuki effect comes off of Mayakashi Winter. All bonus Mayakashi returns after your combo completes should just send Mayakashi Winter to the graveyard, which will functionally act as a revive for one of your synchros, or correct Daki if Daki somehow got removed before your synchro chain could complete. This is why you always run it at 1, it's essentially just Mizuki by another name. And keeping one trap main deck of the Ghost Meets Girl Mayakashi Shiranui Masterful Manuscript is just because occasionally someone will make you go first. This was more relevant when Tenpai was huge, but you still see it occasionally when Blue Eyes thinks they can get a 1-up on you by just forcing you to end on nothing so they can come through and OTK you. Otherwise, you should just completely keep it in the side deck because you can always add in the more copies as an easy way when you're forced to go first after they realize that maybe you're just full-on OTK deck. Finally, given how compact Mayakashi's extra deck is, yes, I know it looks a little bit strange to call it compact when you have 5 synchros and 5 copies of a Link. It is compact. You can run Ultimate Slayer in any format that it is even remotely good. We run a target for every single extra deck type. Entis, Maolong, Mirologic Aggregator, and Yuki Onna the Icicle Mayakashi, which in Grave will resummon a synchro, banished, or in graveyard zombie monster. Sorry, that was the wrong way to say it. But how many decks actually have 4 slots for an Ultimate Slayer so that anything you run across is technically a target for it? This does give us a decent matchup into Ryzeal, although Ryzeal is one of the decks that will absolutely shatter you if you cannot find the Ultimate Slayers, the Imperms, or the Droplets just because of how you keep losing cards on field to Detonator. We also don't run anything more than the 3 Mulcharmies, which seems like a little bit of a strange thing when you're on a 2-card combo, but there are enough cards in this deck that we don't need to draw, and the Mulcharmies as is will generally get us to 7 or 8 cards, which is normally enough to win the game. Why need to risk all of your Wandering Titans of Tartarus, your Eldritch, or your Kashtira Birth and Winters in hand, when you could simply put them to the graveyard at a more opportune time. After all, it is only 26 cards in the deck that are trading out for resources. The rest of them are protection or combo starters. That said, this deck does have a great deal of OTK ability, even in a state where you think you're going to be going to turn 4 before winning the game. Any single point that Daki gets through its combo provides 7,200 damage. That means any extender whatsoever, be it Yuki Musume, be it Eldritch, be it the Heijin getting a Mizuki to graveyard, or Winter in graveyard, represents the full OTK by itself, no questions asked. So while you're not relying on OTKing, this deck was originally built to do exactly that. Break into the board with 26 cards, and then OTK them. But normally, your opponent is in such a bad spot after you get your combo off that you can just use your couple of interrupts off of your Link4s reviving a monster or spell trap destruction to get back into a situation on turn 4, do another monster spell trap destruction, have your negates off Yuki-onna, and finish up the OTK. Remember, doesn't matter what attack points they have, Yuki-onna, the absolute 0, is setting them to 0, which makes your OTKs almost always very easy to calculate out. And setting someone's attacks to 0 pairs very well with one of the cards that we got in 2024, Flying Mary. Flying Mary is one of the best cards Mayakashis could have asked for, clearing your board from the synchros that you've put back onto the field, reviving one again, and if Yuki-onna sets their attack points to 0, well, your monster is always going to have more attack and be able to blow it up, giving you an even clearer OTK line. So with a Yoko revive, you're generally able to set the attack points of a monster to 0 to just roll over it. Yoko blows up a monster, and you get to blow up one off of Ghost Ship. It's so many monsters that you can clear out, or spell traps if you need to go to Tengu instead, that it's very hard to set up any sort of long-term defense to the Mayakashi monsters. That said, there are some downsides of a deck built in 2018, who would have thought? With all the Mulcharmies in the meta, you are absolutely screwed if you go first. Going second really isn't a conscious choice, it's the only option. Unless you want to give your opponent 10 draws, what choice do you have but to just go second and wait for them to put something onto the board? You're also a 2-card combo in a format that almost always values having 1-card combos and then extenders that help correct if your 1-card combo gets interrupted. We don't have that option unless you have 1-for-1 and then simply draw Daki to add on to it, so we can be interrupted way easier than any meta or rogue decks normally would allow. But hey, for a casual deck, being able to do this is really impressive. Finally, there is the downside of this deck being a little bit hard on your hands if you're playing it online. You resummon Daki to the same zone over and over and over again. It is a very repetitive motion. So, be careful. You don't want to screw up your hands playing Yu-Gi-Oh! This isn't like a competitive shooter, but it does get annoying to resummon Daki 10 times a turn just to do your combo. That said, beyond Bluemoy, I've never seen someone post a Mayakashi list that looks even close to optimal. It's a little bit of a pet peeve, but it's also understandable when there's almost no one who's building this deck. I wanted to put this out there because this deck should see more representation, it should see more play, but everything it does reads like it must be one of the most xenophobic decks out there. Despite that, we've had all of these hybrids. We've had all of these abilities to add really cool cards into it that help push this strategy far beyond what Konami has ever allowed us to do. There is a lot you can do with these decks, and still, if you wanted to play a more fun variant, the Kaiju variants and the Eldritch variants do exist. But hey, if you want to try a fun deck, give this one a try. There's about 1,000 games played on this specific variant, basically card for card, that I have, and I can tell you, you're going to surprise a lot of people when they come out and realize that this isn't simply an Ash Blossom first interaction pass sort of deck. This deck is very literally a secret. Very few people even remember that Mayakashis exist, much less would they ever assume that it is a competent OTK deck after the initial run of Mayakashis was basically to be a Bone Tower meme. And please, if you've got the time, give Bluemoy's channel a check, because there's so few people who I watch do deck profiles that give the proper respect to their deck, much less actually able to come into a deck and innovate it when I've seen nothing prior from them whatsoever. It's really nice to be represented in a positive way by the YouTube community. And frankly, you don't see it enough where the deck builders are willing to have some of their stuff shared on YouTube, or the YouTubers are willing to come see what is being cooked by the deck builders. And frankly, I think he just built it independently, which is pretty impressive. So anyway, that's the video, and I'm going to go into hibernation for 2 more years until Konami releases more zombie supports, because prior to 2024, the last good support we got was in 2020, and you know they're going to keep that cadence.